Well, welcome to the U2 Concast, where we explore the music, work, and influence of U2 and take a deeper look at some special topics that are important to not only U2 fans, but we hope a general audience and might widen the horizon for those who are watching us. Today, our guest is Bill Carter, and it's nice to have Bill back. Bill was with us in 2013, and he was a keynote speaker at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when we had a U2 conference in person. I'm your host, Scott Calhoun, and it's nice to have my co-host here with me too. Hi, Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela Pancella. I'm a longtime volunteer with the U2 conference.
Bill was the architect of the outside broadcast transmissions from Sarajevo into the ZooTV tour in July and August of 1993. Bill is a journalist, author, and advocate. He teaches at Northern Arizona University in the Documentary Studies Department, and Bill has spoken around the world on several humanitarian and environmental topics. Bill has written 3 books about his experiences. Fools Rush In is about his time as a young journalist in Bosnia, covering the war and covering the lives of the citizens who are trying to live an ordinary life while under siege. Bill also spent time working as a commercial salmon fisherman in an Eskimo village in Alaska and wrote about his experience in Red Summer. Bill also wrote about the environmental impact of the copper mining industry in Boom Bust Boom. In 1995, Bill directed the award-winning film Miss Sarajevo about his time as a journalist in Bosnia. Bono executive produced the film. Bill has spoken around the world in many countries on many topics of humanitarian and environmental impact. And we're so glad to have him back with us today. Bill, thanks for stopping by.
And thank you again, Bill. It is a pleasure to get to talk to you again. I saw Bono and Edge performing in Ukraine. The streams came out, the videos came out online, and they were in the subway system in the middle of a war. And the very first thought I had was, well, Bono finally gets to perform in a war zone, because I flashed back to the story of the siege in Sarajevo, you going to a U2 concert in the guise of a journalist. I don't believe you were actually technically a journalist at the time, but you got to interview the band, you got to talk to them about the experience there. And so I wondered, A, did you get to see that? I know you're not as lured into the magic of social media as some of the rest of us are. Did you know about their time there, and how did that affect your experience of that?
I did know about their time there. I was in Dublin. So yeah, I knew that. I did know about it, and I watched it on the news, or like you guys did. But yes, and it was it was fantastic. It's an interesting thing. I think obviously it harkens back to Sarajevo. But really what it speaks to is the band they get a lot of flack. Yeah. Anytime they do something seen as, let's call it, good. And I get that. It's kind of a reflex. Yeah. Someone wants to be relevant, someone wants to be hip, someone wants to look cool. That this is and quite often celebrities do that. But I think you have to take the long view when you talk about people. Like, if it's a one-off, or is it 40 years of it? And so if someone's been doing it for decades, it's probably what we would call sustained effort. You know what I mean? It's human rights activism as a job, or as a secondary, as a piece of life. So them going to Ukraine is, to me, a natural thing that they would do, as long as it's safe, and there's obviously things here. But it's just to me natural.
Yeah. Did it remind you specifically of the time in Sarajevo, or was that not on your mind at the time?
Well, what I mean by that is they didn't come during the war in
Sure.
Sarajevo, although
Right.
we really did try. It was more just, a place in need. That's what I mean by that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, yeah. And unfortunately, there's a lot of parallels that don't have to do with you two or anything. So I'm not sure if it's relevant here, but between
It's
what is
all
happening
relevant.
in Ukraine,
Yeah.
okay, what is happening in Ukraine right now and what happened in Sarajevo, I'm talking from a geopolitical kind of way, is literally a cookie cutter. It is the only difference is that the West actively did not want to get involved in Bosnia, and in Ukraine they were involved.
Yeah.
So then that's a good thing. But I'm not up until that, like Putin and Milosevic used the same very, very old, very true and tested, exhausting tricks. The propaganda machine, the brutal killings so that other people get scared, or they try to scare them, or they try to intimidate people. This is all Milosevic did it. And there's literally, it's so ridiculously the same stuff that it's horrifying and a little bit annoying. I thought hopefully it's one of the reasons. Bosnia was unfortunately a wave. Unfortunately, it was an unfortunate education in how the West should not act.
Right.
If something bad, if you're on the verge of a genocide or ethnic cleansing, you need to get going fast on the outside, because if you don't, it's going to be gone. They're going to kill everyone.
Right.
So I think that's kind of maybe what. And Biden, to his credit, was someone during the Balkan Wars that was really pushing for involvement as a senator. So I think maybe that kind of carried over into Ukraine. Just guessing.
Yeah.
Sorry, we got off track.
No.
We were having a musical event in Kyiv, and I went on geopolitics.
Well,
but I was just going to say, I think that I think you two genuinely see themselves as musicians and artists, but they're aware that they have the ability to shine a light on something and be useful.
Yes.
And I've got I've gotten to know them over 3 decades, and they know they're going to stick their neck out, but they also know that it's worth it because it's speaking to core values.
Yes.
So they're like, we're going to do it. And because they know that they can lend if they can be useful with their bully puppet, with their microphone, they're going to do it. If they're just if it's a clown show and they're kind of in the way of everything, then they're probably going to step aside and go back to, home and do what they do. So I think they find the right times to be useful.
Yes. Yeah. Well put.
Bill, what do you think that meant to the people of Ukraine to have Bono and Edge show up and do it the way that they did it? Just speaking from your experience with a different group, but what do you think that meant to those in Kyiv?
I think it's huge. I don't know. You probably can slice Ukraine into different populations, meaning like there's probably young people who are like, I don't know if they care, meaning they don't know who they are. They're not as
right.
When we were doing our thing, they were the biggest band in the world.
Right.
And now they're huge celebrities. So it matters. Anytime someone like that lands in your world, and does something, I realize it was organized, obviously, at a high level in terms of security, but it was in the subway, guitar. It's very natural, very spontaneous is maybe the wrong word, but it felt genuine. And people were just some Ukrainians there with their phones and a Ukrainian band, or at least a singer. And I think it matters. Anytime you're in a conflict, it is a huge gesture when the outside entity comes to lend support.
Yeah.
Even if it's not celebrity, if it's just, people bring in medicine or whatever you're talking about, however you want to do it, it means a lot to people who are in a crisis, because one of the things that happens in the crises, whether it's Sarajevo or Bosnia or whether it's Ukraine or wherever it is, you're going to be quickly cut off. I mean, maybe you have Telegram or whatever they use, but that's kind of okay for communicating to each other. But it's the rest of the world. You're a little afraid sometimes. You're in the middle of darkness in some ways. So it's a big deal.
You mentioned, when it's not a clown show, it's really meaningful. Can you talk a little bit about what were some of your concerns back in '93 that it would how did you make it effective for what you wanted out of it, and how does that process work a little bit so that you avoid it being something that's just a one-off sort of spectacle?
Yeah. I wish I had a good answer for you there, Scott, but
were you worried back then about the clown
I'm looking
show
back
factor?
at that particular, well, maybe. I'm looking back at that moment.
Yeah.
And, both sides, when I say both sides, I mean you two on the road and me inside, we're so busy trying to just get the thing done that there wasn't a lot of time to reflect in real time back then. I promise you I didn't reflect ever because except for okay, where's the next person I have to find? It was so insane to do this stuff from my side, and there was a whole insanity on their side because obviously you're dropping a huge dose of reality on people that they're not ready for.
Right.
They are not ready for this, and they had that problem, right? How do you manage that? And my problem was, after meeting them in Verona under false pretenses, in 10 days, we had our first satellite phone call. It was a phone call, actually, which kind of didn't work. And it worked. I mean, the phone worked, but without the visuals, I think people in the audience were like, I don't know, there's a weird voice coming in. So within 2 weeks or so, we were up and running. And I didn't know how to, there's a room full of satellite gear. We had to hire this crew. We had to hire people, it had to be set up in Geneva for an account to license the satellite airtime. It was just, Ned O'Hanlon did that from on the road from his side. And it was chaotic to do these satellites mostly because of trying to find the right people. And not only I had to find a person and I had to find the right person.
Yeah.
Now that is it's 4 kilometers from basically the center of town to the TV station. And that 4 kilometers is all like death and destruction.
Right.
So most people I got had never been to the TV station. So at least during the war. So I had to get them there somehow, which was difficult. And all these satellites happened after curfew, which makes it really difficult. I usually took them down there before curfew, but coming home was going to be its own insanity of how to get basically past guards. And then, not being killed on the way there and on the way back. And then getting people that would speak without being mad maybe, or freeze up, right? It's a very weird thing you're asking them to do, to suddenly communicate to the world. And, person after person that did this, like if you ask them today, they might have a memory, whatever, but the thing that they never forget ever is the hearing of this thing in their ear. It was like drugs. It was like a heroin. I've never taken heroin, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but it was a rush that you cannot explain.
Yeah.
Because you're in a dark, cold room and you're listening to 60,000 people or whatever it is. And it's so clear, like it's high tech, and everything in your world is low tech. Like everything in your world is gone. And this person would put this in their ear, and it was like just basically it was a sudden overdose of humanity that you were not ready for, and it was kind of beautiful. I mean, the reaction was always like, kind of like that. It was good. It was a good reaction. It wasn't, but it was very powerful emotionally to have that thing in your ear. So anyways, that was, the satellites were, I think what you're asking, which I did not answer, is how to make the satellites not be, I would argue that from my side, it never was a one trick thing, or, but from, I think, the U2 side, because I never saw a satellite. I never visually saw any of these things. Recently I have, but I never saw any of these things. And so, from their side, learning about this, later, was starting to feel like the format was trapped a bit. And once after like 5 or 6 concerts, the new concert, the new fans coming in kind of had a sense that this thing is going to happen. They don't know when, but they kind of had read it in the papers now. So it was starting to kind of, run its course, I think.
Yeah.
Now, from my side, when it got cut off, to be blunt, I didn't really care about whether it was. I knew that for every new audience, there was a chance of tipping it in our favor, right? Like getting some new advocates or whatever you want to call it. And that's all that mattered to me. But I'm also stuck in a cold, dark room and in a war zone. I'm not on the road, and I'm not having to deal with that kind of dynamic out there. So, but I understood later, kind of intellectually, why this might have kind of started not to work.
Mm-hmm.
It was also toward the end of the show. There was only 3 or 4 shows left before that tour was even over. So it was, it ran its course probably.
Mm-hmm. What was striking to me with the what I still think about is the connection, which I might be just making up, between that experience and the social media experience. It was prior to social media, right? We did not have phones in our pockets. We didn't have this ability to speak in real time to people all over the world like we're doing right now. This is a satellite transmission, right? And we don't have to go to Geneva to make it happen. And that was such a new thing, and it was not prepackaged in any way, right? The way that war is often packaged in the West is in these 5-minute stories with a somber journalist speaking with his flak jacket on, and it's got a narrative around it, and there are edited shots. No, this is somebody with, as you said, an earpiece and just going live straight to 60,000 people or more. And you don't know what they're going to say. There's an edge of your seat drama to it that is not manufactured drama. It is an actual person to people connection, and with nobody standing in their way. And as soon as I say that, I realize, well, there is some, as you said, with the spontaneity of Bono and Edge in Kyiv, it's not actually spontaneous, right? There was an awful lot behind the scenes that made that happen. But that moment where that connection happens is so unique. And I'm wondering if that is, if that experience of what you were able to do in Sarajevo in '93 colors your experience of what the world does in social media in any way, shape, or form. Does it reflect on your, because you work in communications, you teach about how these communications happen, and have this interest in humanitarian efforts and travel and getting to know people across cultures and really getting the stories of actual people. And then there's social media, which is another thing entirely, right? Or could be. So
yeah, it's fast. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it kind of goes to the heart. There's a lot there you just asked, but it goes to the heart of really what ZooTV was. and which, was in many ways, it was looking at the news cycle. It was that was the beginning of 24-hour news cycle.
Right.
It's really kind of right, and that war was the first war of
Right.
24-hour news cycle.
Right.
So it was kind of a new world, but you still had to pay a lot. This still was hard to do. You had to have satellite companies, essentially be in war, and I think the reason that when I came up with the satellite idea as basically a way to get around from U2 coming to Sarajevo, maybe dying, is it was kind of literally anti-news.
Yes.
And I think that that's what appealed to the band. I think the band was like, hey, this kind of works for us because this is fitting into the theme of ZooTV, which is the news had become entertainment.
Right.
And what you just asked, what you talked about is there's a kind of this is almost academic, but there's a concept of public and private forms of documentary or forms of documents. And everybody gets a little confused what that means, but public means the news. Everything's ripped from context. Everything, like, you shoot something and then you put it in this 2-minute clip that everybody knows exactly how it's going to go. That person's going to talk. They're going to show some bad footage. They're going to interview like a political person who's going to say, I don't know what's going on, So it's just it's kind of a cookie cutter.
Right.
And private is referring to all the context is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did essentially in the satellites was having private, I don't mean private like secret, I mean connected.
Mm-hmm.
I was connected to the people, I knew them.
Mm-hmm.
They were then going to have the very honest, candid, unedited moment speaking to 60,000 people, which who they don't know.
Yeah.
But what they were saying was true.
Yes.
And we were not going to interfere. YouTube was not going to editorialize, and neither was I, except for we set up these things like kind of in a really quick conversation. But that's it.
Yeah.
And it's almost, we were basically doing old-fashioned news.
Yeah.
We were doing like PBS news, and in an era where that was being kind of pushed aside, which is why the satellites were wrong. They were the wrong thing in the wrong, like they should never, they don't belong in a rock and roll show, the satellites, right? They didn't belong, but that's why we did them, because ZooTV, and this is my opinion, ZooTV was about the numbness that has been created by the media.
Yeah.
And kind of making, almost like taking a piss out of it, right? Like, oh, let's beam in this, let's beam in this, let's beam in this, let's beam in this. And you're like, ooh. And then all of a sudden you have these satellites that are like so raw, so unrehearsed, so I wouldn't want to say I'm not professional, because it was just a camera with a light.
Yeah.
But it was just, the reason they were so powerful, because people may have forgot what it felt like to listen to people just share.
Yeah.
And today's social media, I've I've been very, very lucky to travel over to 70 countries and travel the world over and over and over again for 2.5 decades or 3 decades. And I don't need social media to catch me up. I mean, I do it with I have social media for my family and friends where I get to see things that are happening. And I think that's very useful, a very useful aspect of social media. But I sure don't use social media for news. That's what I don't do ever. So it's not that I think I'm too old. I just think maybe after X amount of time in life, you just you find other ways to spend your time. Something like that. I don't know.
That's so interesting, because what I hear, maybe, and maybe you can elaborate a bit, is like what you thought was so right to do in 1993 as sort of this like anti-journalistic, act. It sounds like now you're a bit distrustful of it, or you don't find it helpful for you anymore. And is that personally, or you mean journalistically? What I mean is like the thing to bring their truth into people's lives. You sound skeptical about now a little bit as sort of the whole landscape of social media.
No, not really. I'm a news junkie. I'm a political news junkie through and through. I have the deepest respect for reporters, and I mean, hell, this 4 years of Trump was incredible for journalism, trying to navigate. So I have a really, that's not really the problem. The problem is social media has so many things on it that I just it's like a rabbit hole. That's what I mean. It's just a personal decision about social media, not news. Without journalism, I think the world will be in trouble. It's because there's a lot of characters out there that want to hoodwink you. If they're not checked, they would. And we just lived through a pretty big time of that. And we still are.
Right.
So, I mean, news, journalism, facts, I don't have any sort of, if anything, I'm more revved up than ever about it. I'm talking about social media and just the endless things that are on it, not necessarily, you know what I mean? That's what I'm about. That's what I'm talking about.
And what it strikes me is that it almost felt like it could have gone in two different directions, and we chose the path that we shouldn't have chosen, right? Because there was this promise within the early, I felt the promise within kind of these early connection points that could have been more like the private, as you were talking about, document of the satellites, in that, you get to talk to somebody across the world with a completely different context who can help you enter into that context. And there are pockets of that available, right?
Yes, of course. Yes.
With Ukraine, I happened to think, thanks to a podcast I listened to, find this random guy in Ukraine who I ended up following on Twitter, and now he's doing fundraising because he's got folks from a podcast he connected to.
Which is amazing.
That's amazing. And he's able to say, okay, these are the supplies I bought for our troops, and thank you for supporting me. And, that kind of it's a very single person in a very specific context that for me stands for the whole experience, because I can't otherwise wrap my head around the war in Ukraine, right? And that, I feel, is the heart of the experience that you brought out of Sarajevo. But that you have to really look for things like that. What's foisted on you by social media is something completely different and anti-humanitarian.
Yeah, it just blanks you out, and you really have to work these days. I mean, what we did with the satellites was pretty revolutionary. 3 years later, you would have used different technology, right? Not a very expensive rental gear of satellites. So it was pretty revolutionary, and it was I think that it was very powerful, and I didn't know that. Meaning, I couldn't. Inside, it was very difficult because the fact is we never got to see them inside.
Right.
So it was so private that no one knew about it. So the experience that happened in Rome or wherever that night was probably intense for those people.
Yeah.
But us, it was weird. Because it kind of felt lonely after you pulled it out. Yeah. You got back in the car and you're like, okay, I got to get past this 4 kilometers, drop this person off, they're kind of a wreck now.
Right.
I got to go back up my 7 stories of no lights, broken glass, don't fall in the elevator shaft, get into my room. And it was a very weird feeling. It was very, that overwhelmingness of humanity you had 10 minutes before becomes kind of filled with a real loneliness.
Right.
because you're just alone in a dark
Right.
building with people shooting at you now, and you're just
Right.
like, and you got no one to share it with.
Right.
No one believes you. No one believes
Right.
you.
Why would they?
Yeah, they're like, that's crazy. You're not doing that. I'm like, oh, okay. And I didn't have time to try to convince people. I was trying to find the next person. So though I will say that one of the great, I mean, Ned, the phone calls I have with Ned every day at 4 to try to brief him on what I was trying to do. Those were they were like gold because they were a communication out.
Yes.
And a different voice. It was a big deal. And I think sometimes, like, they basically didn't know what I was doing. What I mean by that is,
Right.
it was a surprise to them, really, what was going to be on the stage, because it was almost a surprise until we started.
Sure.
So they would try to get a briefing. I'm like, I have a person who, I don't know, they're a painter. Let's go with that. They're like, okay, Bill. Which, by the way, is one of the biggest mysteries to me is, well, Bono knew I was lying to him within 5 minutes of talking to him. Lying meaning
Yes.
it's not
Right.
who I
Right.
said it was.
Right.
And then it went from that to 2 hours, 3 hours later, back at the their villa, to, hey, let's go to Sarajevo.
Right.
With me, I mean, I was, there was a lot of trust there.
Yes.
That really, that's just kind of, it's been the basis of everything with me and them. It's I think it's just that's the way it is.
Sounds like so much of it was instinctual back then, on both sides, and like a lot of just autopilot, seat of your pants.
Right.
Yeah, I get it. Like, you weren't thinking far into the future about, like, oh, how's this going to change the landscape of journalism, or like, when will Twitter show up? You weren't thinking that. But when Twitter and YouTube did show up, and as you started consuming these very intimate things around the world, and I don't know when that first time was for you, but can you remember, like, what was the first thing you saw or felt in the age of social media that gave you the sense of, like, I don't know, validation, or sort of like, hey, let what I did in '93, it's coming into fruition? Like, what was the moment?
Yeah.
When was the moment where you realized, like, you are now receiving what you created back then?
Yeah, it was weird because when it came out, I thought, well, this would have been helpful. It's the same with those, like, solar panel blankets that you can have. They're like, you unroll it and you have electricity and you can charge your phone, you charge your camera. I'm like, that would have been phenomenal. I just thought, man, if you had this and I could have done those things, and there was a lot of like, we were a little bit ahead of this curve, which was a good thing, because you want to be kind of new at what you do, but at the same time, it was it was a little bit of like, wow, that would have been really good to have some of this stuff. And it changed everything, right? I mean, it's changed everything. I mean, Ukraine's a great example of what you were just talking about, Angela, about the connectiveness that can be happening now with people in Ukraine to just whoever. I mean, whoever's tuned into that podcast or whatever you're talking about. That's kind of the power of it. The part I worry about is not that. That is out there and it's working. The part I worry about is the abuse of it.
Right.
The false information becomes so. I mean, I have friends that are just down these rabbit holes and I can't find them anymore. And that's the part that worries me, not the part you spoke about.
Right.
And because people get lost. Yeah. We know there's kind of two sides to this monster. Yeah. And one of it's extremely useful.
Yeah.
The other one is kind of extremely destructive. And I think that these social media platforms are trying to, I'm being too nice. I hope they're trying to figure it out. I think some are a little bit more responsible than others, and I'm not going to get into that. you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it's changed the world. I mean, there's no way around that.
So I'm curious because I realized as I was getting prepared for this conversation, I started looking into, what is happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I was surprised to see some journalism around things not, there was one piece that was done in, I think, Radio Free Europe about the promise of the Pop Mart Sarajevo show and the new Sarajevo that could be built, and that things were not quite, in this writer's opinion, living up to that possibility. So I'm curious about how your friends in Sarajevo are doing now. What's your take on how things are in that specific part of the world?
Yeah, yeah. I just spent some time with them recently, and I think that there's a strong feeling that that in many ways, there was a lot of hope after the war, especially around the U2 concert, actually, that felt good. It was like, okay, we got this.
Yeah.
And now, in many ways, they're not worse off than the war. That's that's a ridiculous statement.
You're right,
but they're
right.
worse off in many ways than they never thought they'd be this far out from the war.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it has to do with I mean, I don't want to bore your audience, but it has to do with the Dayton Peace Accord. The Dayton Peace Accord is not written as it's not a peace treaty. It's a frozen conflict treaty. And the only way it works is that all three of there's three entities, the Bosnian Serbians, the Bosnian Croatian area, and Bosnia. Let's call it that. They have to agree. If they don't agree on kind of state issues, they can't do anything. Like, that doesn't work. So what you have basically is, think about it like a city in the United States where the mayor is elected every month. So no one does the trash. No one, I'm being metaphorical, but no one takes care of the business of running the state because it's going to change.
Right.
You have 2 years in Bosnia as a leader, but you can't even make a national decision without the other two entities, who are basically, think about like in America, we've gone through a situation of extremism, right?
Right.
And that extremism is often controlled by actually not that much in the base, but they're very loud.
Right.
That exactly is what's happening in Bosnia. The nationalist people of those three entities are the loudest. They come in with their arms moving, and everybody else is like exhausted. So those are the entities that keep running the circus. And so really nothing gets done. And the nationalistic, tribalistic, fascist entities of especially Bosnia and Serbia is just dragging that place into the mud. Because they're answering to other nationalistic forces that are currently very active in Ukraine. So, meaning Russia. That's what I'm trying to say. So there's a lot of Russian influence in this part of the world with the Serbs and with the national Serbs. I want to separate.
Right. Sure.
There's a lot of people in Serbia that this is all nonsense to them.
Right.
So, but those nationalistic ones are pretty darn loud, and it doesn't allow any forward progress. And I'm on a working group, we have a name, but it's a lot of people, ex-ambassadors, academics, a lot of people that are working to try to help Bosnia in a couple different directions. One is try to get in the EU. Another one is also there's a lot of revisionism history going on right now, and it's very depressing. Most has to do with genocide in Srebrenica, but there's a lot of Bosnian Serbs who are now just basically like that didn't happen. They're literally the people who killed them. Like, they're literally the soldiers that are now living in those villages, but they're like, oh, that never happened. And it's mind-boggling, because some of the people that are doing this are literally the people who did it. So
Yeah.
it's just depressing. It's absolute hell.
Yeah.
That you, because it reminds you, though, it's a very interesting, it reminds you intellectually that history is so important to keep reminding yourselves what happened, because there are people that are in 100 years from now, no one's going to remember this little battle that's going on about what revisionism is. They're just going to know what is the narrative that survives like at the 50-year mark, or whatever year mark. And that's the one that floats into, like, you know, Kit Carson's a hero, or you know, but not really, or you know, or whatever, you know, that narrative gets going and sticks is the one that your grandchildren would be like, oh, that happened. I hope it's right. I hope the history's right. So I always find that very interesting about history.
And is it still the case? I think I saw something with you talking to a Guadalajara Geopolitics Institute with some students there, and you talked about the Serbian, among some Serbians, the victim mentality. Do you feel like that's part and parcel of it?
Yeah, but I don't want to dip into our own problems, but you know, Trump is only he's just a recent development of this. This is a very old tactic. You know, if you take Stalin, Mao, Hitler, Milosevic, Putin, whoever you want to pick, they all have these things in common. They all have, we're victims.
Yes.
And if you don't wake up and take care of us, they're going to commit genocide on us. Now, no one on that side is even aware that anything's wrong. They're like, it's like when you tell Russia that you're going to get the Nazis out of Ukraine, Ukraine's like, are we talking about us? Because, you know, so that's the game. They over there, this is the blueprint.
Yes.
Over there, those people over there, they're going to kill you. So if you don't wake up, they're going to come over and kill you. Now it becomes the other.
Right.
And once you become the other, there you go. Trump divided America. Oh, now it's already got problems. I'm not saying Trump is that smart that he created something. I'm saying he used this tool of, like, those people are trying to take what you got. Now, the irony of that, of course, is that you're talking about a person that doesn't care about any of those people. Doesn't even pay his own workers, you know, construction, I mean, this guy's a con man, and yet people fell for it. And just like they fell for Stalin, who ended up killing 10 to 30 million people through his nonsense. Same with Hitler, who ended up killing, you know, we know the story. This is not like, it's not new. And they end up usually I hate to say this, but a lot of these disasters in at least modern history have been, do you find something in common here? They're usually the policies of one man destroying the whole gig. And you know,
and it's so useful to keep that in mind too, because it keeps, and I heard Bono say that about when he was asked, and I could tell that he was like, I don't even know if I want to be somebody talking on Ukraine, right? I am an overfed rock star. I don't live this out. But I remember him saying this is one man's war. And that was like, if you focus it on Putin, then that helps keep Russians who might be a little bit on the fence from saying, oh, Putin was right. The world is against us as Russians. You know, that way of
which we're not.
No, right. Yeah. So you really do have to, like, make sure that you are very specific and empathetic with the people who are having to suffer under that one man's policies, who include the people in his own country.
Oh, I'm extremely sympathetic to, like, even the soldiers who are in this army of Russia who are like, I'm confused. Are we really? What are we doing?
Right,
you know, I mean, you know, I know I think there's a lot of people that are caught up on that side that are really confused, and that's a terrible place to be if you're 22. You know, no, this is all Putin and his. I mean, it's probably a gaggle, but let's just call it Putin because it all stems from him, who's lost in his own dreams of a world that never really existed before anyway.
Right.
The Russian Empire was never some sort of, fantastical thing. It was kind of, go ask Hungary, and I'm talking about the old Hungary in the 50s, or, Czech. I'm sure that wasn't like the dream time for them, So he's just chasing some fantasy of being remembered in history books or something. I'm actually, to be honest with you, in terms of this conversation, as someone who, is very up, I keep up to date on the world because it fascinates me, is he's always been someone that you have to be careful of. But I never thought, I don't understand the end game. It's like the first time what
Right.
is the end game again? Because you can't, even if you could, you can't control Ukraine. There's 45 million people there. You can barely, it's like us trying to, if we went to go attack Puerto Rico, not a good idea, but we still wouldn't, after 10 years, it'd be like, oh, that's a nightmare. Even for, you know what I mean? It's hard to possess other things when there's humans there that don't like you. They're just going to be in your way all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, he seems to me a little bit in trouble here. Maybe not on a day-to-day basis, but I mean, like, what's the long game?
Well, how would you advocate?
I'm sure we're far off topic.
No, that's fine. No, that's great. Like I'm thinking, like you're teaching young people. You're trying to pass on what you learned, as an activist and as an advocate, and I just keep coming back to what you said about you two eventually decided this isn't working in our show. Maybe it was like 10 broadcasts, or after a month of broadcasts, they wanted to change up the experience for their audience and put you in a position. But it brings to mind like the shelf life of a powerful moment of advocacy, maybe is just a month, or maybe now it's just a couple hours until the next cycle or the next narrative shows up. And it's like, what have you learned since then? Or what do you, when you think back, like, what do you pass on to people about how an artist and a journalist and an activist, which, you are all three, like where do you get the most bang for your buck? Like what's the way to advocate for something, whether it's, it's in Europe, it's in the US, it's wherever you're drawn to, like
that's a great question, Scott. That is a great question. And it's one that riddles me constantly. And I think that I wish I was some sort of smart man who could tell you the answer to this question, but I'm not. I'm just a guy who, generally speaking, goes on instinct. So, for instance, I'll just give you a for instance, okay? Like Boom Bust Boom. The reason I wanted to write this in many ways is because I was fiercely against a mine being opened that would kill the salmon fishery in Alaska. Now, a book is probably the slowest roll you can ever do for trying to advocate, right? I mean, you got to write it, then you got to get it published. Will people read it? I mean, and less now. But you know what? It kind of worked. And I wrote it because I wanted to put all these things in one book in one moment. But when I went out there, I realized, wow, there's a lot of people that are against this mine that don't usually talk to each other. And the book is something people were reading. And there's a great story. I was at the town hall. It's a public speaking thing in Seattle. So like they bring speakers, right? So it was right before, this is during the Obama administration. So it was right before a ruling by the EPA on the Clean Water Act about pebble. And the fact that they were looking at this was extremely controversial because we've never actually invoked the Clean Water Act before a mine asks for a permit. They always, the way mines work is they have to ask to get permitted, then it takes a decade of back and forth. There are enough people that realize that this shouldn't ever be built, that the EPA was going to declare the Clean Water Act problems before they even ask. So that's the setup. I go to the town hall. I'm just kind of going. I'm in the back kind of little hallway area, and this person says, "Hey, are you Bill?" I said, "Yeah, are we secret?" And they said, "Hey, we work for the EPA. We're lawyers here in Seattle, and we've been the ones for the last 2 years working on this." I said, "Oh, great. Can you tell me anything?" And they're like, "No, but we just want to tell you that there was 13 of them, I think, there at the talk, and they all came up afterwards and bought many books, and they said this book was hugely important to us, because I think what happened is I went and did all the work that they didn't know existed out there, like, little details. And so to me, it's like, well, that worked. And by the way, within 2 days later, it was announced that they denied the mine based on the EP on that ruling. Now, and then Trump came in and said, okay, and now it's gone back, and now I think it's actually dead. And it's dead because Native American tribe up there figured out a really interesting way around this, and they did a good job. So I think it's dead. But my point, back to your question, Scott, is sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's social media. I did the beginning of COVID. I did a thing with MIT. I work a lot with them, and it was this. I was way out of my league here. It was three of us, the senior director at global programs at the School of Business in MIT, plus the dean, associate dean, and me. We created an idea that we needed help with. And who did we need? We needed people that were a lot younger than us, who knew how to use, God forbid, Slack. And so I became a Slack master, 40 channels. And we basically were trying to create idea hacks for COVID in Africa. Because the idea was, Africa is going to be overwhelmed by this. And electricity problems, medicine, all the stuff. So we created this hackathon that was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. We had people from all over the world. We had hundreds of universities. We had, it was a very, very fascinating experience, which I probably won't bore you with, but it was, and I got one involved, and the Clinton Foundation, and et cetera, with the help of people that this thing exists for. I was helping hands there. And so it was an incredible experience of social media working. And it was all one weekend, meaning it took 3 weeks, but it would happen on one weekend in 48 hours. And out of that came sponsors who then backed some of the ideas and got them in play within 1 week, whether they were social apps to help people communicate about this and just electrical issues that they could get the surge to go from one town to the next, to help with the hospital goes out of electricity during COVID. So it was all kinds of stuff. It was incredible. So there's one way. And then I do a charity event every year where I live to raise money for Native American kids to go to the school. And it's called the Dream Concert. And that's done through my relations with really musicians. It started by Jackson Browne in the 90s, and it ended. And I said, "Hey, Jackson, why don't we do this again virtually?" He's like, "Yeah, let's do that again." So, and then it's been incredible. We've raised $150,000 in 2 years, and it gets people together. And COVID, it was hard. It was virtual. So my point is, I don't know the right way, but I just tend to go with whatever's kind of seems like it might work for that particular issue. If that makes any sense, whether it's social media, whether it's a book, whether it's a documentary, whether it's, I don't know. I don't have a go-to except for that it works.
Now, it sounds like when you commit, though, you go all in, and you put. I mean, you're putting in your heart, your mind, your effort, your research. Yeah,
I'm kind of an all-in person. So like the Dream Concert takes 3 months of intense everything, and interaction. Get into files, then I edit it, and then just the whole thing. Getting into streaming, getting into blah 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 blah, and I just do it. But teaching, I love teaching because of that too. Is also, I think, it's like an immediate You know, young people they don't know sometimes that they're getting what they need, you know, from your class. And then you're like, then 2 years later, they're like, oh yeah, well that worked. That was really great. So, but you don't teach to get that immediate thing. You teach to try to just kind of load them up and let them move out, you know? And I enjoy that. It's really been a nice thing to do in my life. So yeah, I don't know, whatever works. Sometimes it's just a phone call, you know, to that person, and like, okay, that worked.
So what I think is, we talked a little bit about this before we started officially recording here, that there's something about U2 fans that are particularly all in kind of folks, and you're not alone in that. I know that you've been able to meet other people who are also really all in. But it's one of the things I really love talking to you, because you almost are like the representation of that kind of spirit. I think that you demonstrate that you don't have to be, you know, the amazing mega rich rock star. You just have to be somebody who is willing to go and do the thing when your instinct kicks in and says this is the thing to do. So thank you for demonstrating that and living that. I know you've not been doing that specifically to model it to other people, but you have also modeled it to other people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's an interesting thing, right? Because I get asked this question. I don't have like I don't do it to model for other people. I just generally I kind of have this thing where I think life's about kind of leaving it better than you found it, or being useful. Yeah. So I just kind of do that, and I'm not. If someone else, if they don't know that I did it, I'm like, I don't really care. You know, I'm just trying to kind of, probably even more now than ever, because I'm a parent of two daughters, and I want to, you know, I don't lecture them at night about all this crap, but I think they probably see it. They kind of go, you know what I mean? They're probably catching a little bit of this on the side. You know, I hope. You know.
I'm sure they are. I think you've left. Yeah, you've left after almost 30 years later since that first phone call, which turned into a broadcast. But yeah, so many people's lives are better off now. So thank you, Bill.
Well, I hope so. My life's better, but thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to our U2 Concast with Bill Carter. We thank you for your time, Bill, and we hope everybody got a lot out of this. Please follow Bill as you can on his limited social media appearances, but also check out his website in the link below. And please like and share this video. And we look forward to seeing you again for another U2 Concast. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you so much for having me.